So when I hire, I don't need the world's greatest accountant. I need an average accountant. I need one who can do the job, right? 99 times out of 100, that's exactly what I need. So I need a center mass, right in the middle. That's all I'm looking for from a competency standpoint. So you come in and you've been an accountant for 10 years, you can do the job. The question is, can you get it done and figure it out? And that's what I hire for. Like, that makes you the person that's going to fit in our team versus not. There is, and I think in startups, that's incredibly important. And it's not as important in big companies sometimes. There's nothing wrong personality wise. There's not, like, going to Bank of America is a fine career choice. But as you sit in your desk, there is someone over your shoulder who was in that desk 18 months ago. So you can turn around and say, what do I do now? And they'll have an answer. At a startup, there is no one there.
Yeah.
If you have to come to me and say, what do I do now? I have to stop what I'm doing, pull my eyes off the horizon as the CEO, and figure out what you need to do. And I consider that your job, right? Like, what do you need to do? Figure that out and then go get it done.
If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you've heard me and Josh talk about MWI, which is our digital marketing agency. If you're new around here, this may be a first introduction to MWI. We're a full-service digital marketing agency that specializes in everything from website design and development to search engine optimization and all forms of paid advertising, whether it's paid social advertising or paid search advertising, content marketing, digital PR, social media management. Basically anything a business needs to strengthen and grow their digital footprint is what we do over at MWI. The website is mwi.com. And for any listeners of the Hope Strategy podcast, I'd love to offer a free 20-minute consultation with yours truly to talk about your business, to talk about your goals, to understand, what you need to be doing from a digital marketing strategy and action plan standpoint in order to yield some results and grow your business online. So please reach out at mwi.com/hope strategy. That's mwi.com/hope strategy to sign up, and we will be in touch. Now back to the show.
Something is happening in our world.
Time is very precious.
I'm gonna show you how great I am.
Hope in the face of difficulty.
More than machinery, we need humanity.
Hope in the face of uncertainty.
I'm better now than I was. I'm experienced now.
Changing the world can happen anywhere, and anyone can do it.
The audacity of hope.
This is the Hope Strategy Podcast with Corey Blake and Josh Steinley. So why don't you tell me a little bit about kind of your upbringing and where you're coming from? Obviously, you've gone on to do a ton of entrepreneurial things, which we'll get into, and been successful in a lot of different avenues. But what's your upbringing like? Where'd you grow up, and what was that all about?
Yeah, I grew up in Independence, Missouri, just outside of Kansas City. In fact, it's where Arrowhead Stadium is. So there's a 7-second delay from the time you hear the loudest stadium in the world cheer, and when it comes through the signal on your TV.
I didn't realize that was in Independence.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, Arrowhead's right there, and so anyway, that's where I grew up, and then we lived in Utah for 3 years when I was in high school, and then we moved back to Kansas City area. And I went to a state school about an hour from home. So Kansas City's home. Utah is probably as close I have to a second.
And that's where you are now, right? You're based in Utah?
Yeah, we just moved here a year ago. We were in Connecticut for the last 5 years. We were in Texas for a year before that, and Santa Monica for 3 or 4 before that. So we moved around a bit, but yeah.
Yeah, my brother-in-law went to medical school in Kansas City and unexpectedly fell in love with it. And then the family went out there and visited and stuff, and everybody was like, oh man, what a little gem. I've heard nothing but good things. Super
kind of under the radar, but it is, high level talent, hardworking people, super Midwestern nice, it's got an awful lot going for it. And I think it's kind of on a tear lately. We've got some investors who are focused in Kansas City. There's a group called KC Rise Fund that invests in founders from or connected to Kansas City businesses in and around Kansas City. So I got to speak to 40 or 50 of their limited partners who are all investors in the fund that are around Kansas City just yesterday. It's just an incredible group of folks, and there's all kinds of fun things happening there. And you have big companies you might not think of that were headquartered there for a long time. Everybody from Applebee's to AMC to Sprint. So I mean, you could take careers in every different direction there. It's not an industry town the way that LA might be, or Boston with healthcare, whatever it is. It's got a good broad sort of appeal. And so I grew up there. I'm the oldest of 8 kids. My dad went to 8 semesters of summer enrollment at the local church college in Utah, and my mom didn't go to college. So we moved back my senior year from Utah. I was 16. I graduated 1 semester after we got back. And so I didn't have a counselor who knew me. I didn't have any siblings who had come before.
Wait, so you moved back to Kansas City from month Utah before you graduated?
No, we moved going into my senior year, and I just graduated at semester in December. So
that's a tough transition, man. Going into your senior year. Oh, man.
Timpview High School in Utah is the only school in my life to this day that I went to for more than 2 years.
Okay. So
in a row.
Business as usual.
So it was just, man, it's par for the course. I was happy to go back and go home, but it meant I didn't know anybody in my high school. And I was a little younger than the other kids. So, the other kids my age were still sophomores and juniors. So nobody I knew was applying to college. And I sometimes refer to it as the perfect storm of stupid, but I didn't have a counselor. I didn't have parents who knew. I didn't have nobody knew. And so I'd probably seen in movies that people apply to college, but I don't know. I drove to Central Missouri State, an hour from home, in August and asked how to sign up for a dorm. And
I live here? Are there rooms available?
How do I do that? And they're like, oh, it should be in your packet. I'm like, yeah, I don't think it was in mine. And 10 minutes later, they're like, did you apply? And so I'm like, well, just, tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. And they're like, no, man. And they kind of pat you on the head verbally. And they're like, that had to happen in March. So I only got into college because a kind-hearted registrar took pity on me. And I had halfway decent test scores. So that probably tells you a little about how I grew up, right? And growing up in Kansas City. We were disappointed on Super Bowl Sunday when our offensive line couldn't block anyone.
What was that all about? That was unbelievable. I'm still I haven't read enough for try to figure that out, but that was shocking. Not to go down a rabbit hole on football. Yeah, no. But it was how did he just not get there was no blocking at all? I mean,
we had 4 starters out, including an all-pro tackle and a Pro Bowl tackle.
Okay.
Right. We were starting 4 out of 5 guys were undrafted.
I think I knew that, they mentioned it, but it's still really though, every single play, Mahomes is just running for his life.
Yeah. It was, we beat them, 5 weeks previous.
Yeah.
With one.
And I'd watched quite a few Kansas City games throughout the season, and I never saw, it was that wasn't a common theme. I mean, that wasn't the best offensive line, but it wasn't Mahomes has to make every play happen while he's 3 inches from falling to the ground. He's about to hit his face on the ground.
It's because in the AFC Championship game, we lost the left tackle. And so everything got shuffled to get even further. And it just got diluted to a point. They're like, oh, they don't have enough depth. We have a ton of depth and on the O-line, right? All the draft prognosticators today will tell you that they need to all go draft the O-line. And we have 2 Pro Bowl, 1 all-pro tackle coming back, and a 3rd-round draft pick last year who opted out. So who I'm really excited about. So we moved from New Canaan, Connecticut, and Lucas Nyang, who was our 3rd-round draft pick for the Chiefs, is from New Canaan, Connecticut, little town, 25,000 people.
Oh, cool.
And then went to TCU, and the Chiefs picked him up. And I just love the natural connection points, right?
Yeah.
So my sisters, I have 2 sisters who went to White House High School with Patrick Mahomes, one of whom then went to Texas Tech with Patrick Mahomes. And so when he came to the Chiefs, again, it's one of those just perfect storms of happiness.
Serendipitous sports moment. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a disappointing game to watch. I was like, you know what, Tom Brady, that'd be fun. I love watching Patrick Mahomes. I just wanted a good game, like so many people, as just being a football fan. And then it was next year.
Not a great game.
Yeah, it'll turn around.
Ryan Hamilton is a comedian who's got a bit where he talks about being at a debate. an election party in 2016. Mm-hmm. And he says, have you ever been at a party that turned into not a party halfway through? It's sort of one of his lines. And I was thinking of that as I'm watching the Super Bowl, and everyone I know leaves.
Yeah.
They went to other rooms in the house. They're watching them in the basement, but everybody left me because they're like, at some point, this is not going to go well.
And it's kind of awkward in that situation because you're like, we want to be here. And it's this is supposed to be an exciting thing regardless. But everybody's like, I don't really care to be here anymore. This is clearly not happening,
Yeah.
Slowly just crickets. And then next thing you know,
totally.
you're the last one sitting there sobbing.
So I was definitely at a party that turned into not a party halfway through. They'll be good.
What was being the oldest of 8 kids? I've got 4 kids and I've got the oldest, he's 9. So we're kind of in the trenches with figuring out how to not screw him up too much by putting too much pressure on him. What's your advice for parents to the oldest kid? That is a very sincere question at this point.
Yeah. So I've got 3 boys that are 10, 7, and 5. So we're in a similar spot.
Okay.
And, a couple years ago, I don't know that I'm doing it any better than anybody else. I would assume I'm an average dad.
Yeah.
And I know there's places I could certainly be better dad. But a couple years ago, we realized my oldest wasn't super in here, signing him up to kids soccer or whatever. He wasn't super into it. And my middle child was at that age really good. And so he was also bored. And so we just kind of like, they'd come over to me halfway through their games and be like, Daddy, did you see? And all they cared about was whether or not I saw it. And then if I said, yeah, I saw you score a goal, they'd just go to the jungle gym. They didn't even finish the game.
Yeah.
And they're little kids, but they weren't into it. And so we stopped signing them up for sports, not because there was anything against sports, but we got our Saturdays back. And so I've got an Evernote file of 60 Saturdays or more where we would do day trips as a family. And we'd go out in the morning and we call it boys breakfast because it used to be I would take the boys out and give mom the morning off. Now we all go together, but we'd go grab breakfast at some place we haven't been to before. And then do some activity, waterfall hike, visit a college campus and like go to the Natural History Museum, whatever it was. And we did that every week for, a couple of years generally. And it was just great. And it was just great. Like there's an age where they still like, you said your oldest is 9.
Yeah. It's 9, 6, 2, and brand new.
Yeah. So your oldest still holds your hand and likes you.
Yeah.
Right. And there's going to come a day in the next 5 years where they don't want to do that anymore. It's just part of growing up, right?
Yep, for sure.
And so I'm just like, I don't know if it's being a good dad or just selfish, but I'm just totally rocking this stage right now. I just love hanging out with my dudes. And so they're all in sports and they do lots of stuff now. But we also really love our day trips. And so I read a book recently called Range. I think it's a New York Times bestseller, but the opening chapter compares Federer's upbringing with Tiger Woods. And Tiger Woods, golf club in his hand before he could walk. 2 years old, he's on the Johnny Carson show. At 4 years old, he's winning under 11 tournaments, and it's been golf from day one and never anything else. Federer dinked around until he was well into his teens. He played all kinds of sports. He did random stuff, but they were not like a sports culture family. And it turns out the research says there's a lot more Federers out there that are elite athletes than Tigers. Parents tend to think they can control for Tiger. Right. So this is what I can do as a parent is like help them focus. In reality, Patrick Mahomes, his dad will tell you football was his 4th best sport.
Yeah.
Right. And being well-rounded and doing all kinds of stuff. So I'm a big believer in just letting kids kind of be happy. Right. And I think if you can give them confidence so we do enough sports that when their buddies want to play basketball, they know how to play. But not so much that they're like drilling it every weekend.
We're literally like right in the same. So I think it was basketball season. We had signed them up but I'd signed them up late. I had missed the debt. So it was like, yeah, you can do it, but you've got a coach. I said, great. I love to coach. Let's do it. But then it just like none of the parents were being involved, and I was trying to get things going. Nobody wanted to help out. And I just said, you know what? We don't need to do it. Like, I'm just going to say, hey, I respectfully, this isn't working out. So we didn't do it. And so we had that gap, and man, like you said, we got our Saturdays back. It was like, hey, let's wake up. Let's go do something for grandma and grandpa, or let's let's hang out as a family in the morning. Or like you said, let's go on a day trip. We did a couple of those. And I really, it puts things into perspective a little bit. And here's us, and a lot of our listeners, know the story, know how kind of we've transitioned, but we were in Hawaii for 8 years. And the whole lifestyle in Hawaii, as you've been there a lot, is just a lot more. People give it like shakas and hang loose and you just lay around and do nothing. It's lazy. That is not the case. But the focus is different. The focus is family. It's health and wellness. It's not putting too much stress on the small stuff. And really like kind of prioritizing and minimalizing. And we loved that. And so moving back to Arizona, where we live now, it was like, okay, we've got to go in and not lose everything that we've learned to love. And so, and Utah is very similar, in a lot of places people live where there's kind of this outside pressure at all times to be like, you got to do all the sports, you've got to do all the music classes, you've got to do all and it really can get in the way when you've got, 4 kids of just like sanity and really like real moments with your kids,
Absolutely. So we think my wife is big. I have no musical talents or gifts whatsoever. My talents and gifts lie hopefully in other places because they are not there. And she's like, I want the kids to, I think it's important that they develop some musical talent. I said, okay. So, our kids have explored a couple little things, but my oldest now this last year said, I want to play the piano, right? He's 10. And so we're like, okay. And he has taken to it like a fish to water, but it's totally self-directed. So, we have a teacher that's via Zoom, right? He puts a little iPad up on the keyboard while he's practicing, whatever. But it's self-motivated because he's into it. He's old enough to do it. Yeah. And rather than us directing it when he's 4 or 5 or 6. And there's some real wisdom in that. There's the Finnish are kind of famous for having the best, educational system in the world. And they don't teach anybody to read until they're 7 or 8. Because when you're 7 or 8, you can get it and it clicks. Mm-hmm. And when you're 5, it's a painful struggle. And you teach all the kids that they don't like reading, which just isn't the case. Yeah. They just didn't like, having to trudge through it when they weren't ready. And so there's some real wisdom in like letting them come to it when they're ready. Right. And do those things. And then letting it just happen, like whatever their interests are. So I'm a big believer in big believer is strong. It's not like a articulated strategy, but I'm sometimes mocked inside my own family for doubling down on whatever my kids are into. Yeah. Like one of my kids is that kid who always picks up rocks and puts them in his pocket. So we bought little pickaxes and we go rock hounding out in the Utah, desert. And we're picking up, obsidian off the ground and Vernon Wonderstone and stuff. And the kids are having a great time and they feel like they're living Minecraft, right? But so we've got now rock hounding gear, which is not, wouldn't have been my own first choice hobby, but I just kind of get into whatever they're into. And I think it's okay that they bounce around and they're committed to something at, 6 years old, right? Yeah.
And it seems like the direct reward there, like for the kid is, and kind of the surface level, like obvious things like, I'm getting time with my dad, which is important. But then if you look at kind of some of the underlying values and principles that are being learned there, I feel like there's a whole lot going on there that's a lot more than just time, but it's also like, I'm being seen, that, it's okay to like things that maybe nobody else likes. And not only that, but my dad's got my back to invest in this with me and to take, the money and the time and the resource, whatever it is to go and explore and do this. And then, that's great.
I'm a real person to them, not a kid, not like they don't discount my opinion. I matter. And my whole thing is just help them be confident because they all come like you have got 4 kids for all the ways you thought you wanted to raise your kids before you had them. You meet them and then realize they come pretty much fully baked. Yeah. Like their personality is theirs. My kids are wildly different from one another and they're all fantastic. Yeah. But they came fully baked and they got to discover what their ingredients are. And that's kind of part of the fun. But I walked into my oldest probably 2-3 years ago and he reads in bed for a half hour before he goes to sleep because he's the oldest when all the kids' bedtime's the same. And so he gets to keep his light on for a little bit. And I go in and he has the back of the dictionary open. I'm like, what are you doing, buddy? He's like, I found this chart. Have you heard of the periodic table? And I'm like, yeah, I have. He's like, it seems like everything in the universe is made up of this stuff. So I feel like I should know it. He has been drilling and memorizing the periodic table at 8 years old, completely of his own volition. So, we double down. He's got, his shower curtains, the periodic table and whatever else. And so he's got his interest. He loves sort of chemistry and material science and astrophysics and all that kind of stuff. But he's also he goes to Code Ninjas and he corrected my Python code the other night when I couldn't get something to go. He's like, oh, you have to indent in this. And he moved it over. And I'm like, thanks, buddy. Why don't you pull up a stool and help me do this? And he also, is really, really strong. So he's just built for strength. We tell my kids they're built for strength. They're built for speed. They have different body types. Yeah. And, now on his flag football team, they give him 1 carry a game and he's 3 yards in a cloud of dust because they'll just run into people. Yeah. But mostly he plays defensive line and he's real effective at pushing that pocket, Yeah. So he's just got a wide variety of interests that have nothing to do with each other and little seeming crossover. And he gets to be confident in it. And so he's that kid who, he's got my ADD. And so he'll be talking to me looking one way and run straight into a pole. And instead of being embarrassed, he will laugh at himself and be like, did you guys see over my own 2 feet? Because he's confident. That makes me, I feel like those are dad moments where I'm doing something right,
Yeah. That confidence is, and you're exactly right. They all come out different. You're just, And the first one you don't really notice, and then the second one you're like, oh, they're different. By the time I've had 4 kids, like you notice it really early, like a couple days in, you're like, oh, she's got this type of thing going on and this type of thing going on. I'm excited for your hopefully your son will listen to this in 10 years and be like, oh man, my dad was stoked on me.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you,
boost.
My favorite human. He goes to a different school than my other kids, and he rides his bike after school to my office, does his homework, 3D prints something. Then we go downstairs and work out and then go home. And it's like the best. Like I look forward to this 90 minutes every day. It's the highlight of every day. Just me and him. It's like one-on-one time. So he loves it.
I love this. I love this direction we're going. So this is, again, on the surface, everything you're saying, anybody listening is like, this guy's got it figured out. Like, well, that's like, and you preface this whole thing by saying, look, I don't claim to know everything, but here's what I'm doing. But talk to me a little bit more about the behind the scenes of this, like, because this takes planning and forethought, and I'm guessing really good communication with your spouse. And like you said, you're reading, you read range, and all these different things. I mean, what does your process go into in order to, be building these kind of habits with your kids as a dad and stuff? What does your process look like?
I wish I could take more credit for like having a master plan and having think it through. I talk to other dads who I admire, like who raised good families, and like it's not an uncommon conversation for me. I got some advice years ago, 9 years ago. Well, my oldest then was 3. So, on being sort of intentional, building intentional experiences with them, which was just not something I'd considered. So at 3 years old, I told him, and all my kids now know, that when they're 12, they get a trip with me, a 12-year-old trip. And my thought was it's an age where you talk about like growing up and how you treat girls and, like responsibilities that you're going to start inheriting and, all that kind of stuff. So my thought was we'd go away on a camping trip or something and have some of those conversations that you need to be intentional about having. And it would give us a one-on-one opportunity to do that. But then I said, but I want them to do something hard. And in the back of my mind, what I'm thinking is when they're whining about a calculus test in high school, I want to be like, remember, you can do hard things. Mm-hmm. So my oldest, Ammon, is like, since he was 3, like when I'm 12, I want to hike Kilimanjaro. So next summer, that's what we're doing. And, we're at a place in life where that's something that it's a stretch, but we can afford. And not everybody's there, but it's not about Kilimanjaro. It's just about finding that thing, whatever it is. And a buddy of mine had done this with his kids, and they went to Yellowstone, right? And it was just a week with dad, one-on-one. And so each of my kids will get that, whether it's a rim to rim hike in the Grand Canyon or just something that gets you away, pulls you away, gives you time to just be together and hang out. And I think that's important. So that's one of those few things where I would say we have planned out in advance, and like thought through. I got advice from a friend on like building a family. They had like a family, almost like constitution, where he's like, here are 7 types of maturity we want to like generate in our kids: financial maturity, emotional maturity, mental maturity, physical maturity, like all worldly maturity, like all these kind of academic different things. Yeah. And so then when questions would come up as a family, they would say, okay, well, does this meet with the kind of things we want to do? Right. When my daughter, as he said, when my daughter wanted to study abroad in France, so well, like worldly maturity, like learning a language and, those things were important to us. And so we figured out how to make that work. And we would go back to it. And then I talked to his son and he was like, Dad told you about that? Yeah. I mean, I heard about it once or twice growing up, but it wasn't like a guiding document, Yeah. So, we're all dads, we're all figuring it out, and you hear a good idea and you kind of absorb it. And so I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily better than anybody else at like thinking it through. I read a lot, but not often on parenting, right? Every now and again I'll do, but and we certainly have as many challenges as anybody else would. And I think
that says a lot. I mean, the first few things you said are somebody told me this and my friend said this, like that type of mentorship and like team effort, when you've got people around you that you trust, and whether it's people that are older and wiser than you or people that are doing it at the same time, but are figuring things out differently than you're not, that type of mentorship is critical in anything, but maybe it's something that gets overlooked in parenting sometimes.
I mean, we all know the families we came from, and mostly what I hear is like, oh, I'm not going to do it like my parents. Like you highlight all the things you didn't like. Yeah. When in reality, like for most of us, most things probably went fine, right? There are some sharp things that may not have, but But that's what we learn from. And then we get married and we have in-laws and we learn from them what we do and don't like, but sometimes maybe we don't go further.
Yeah.
But
cool, man. Well, I didn't anticipate such a great discussion on parenthood and fatherhood, but that's awesome. Great. I'm taking notes. I love these conversations. Like it started with like, when I started the podcast, it was a lot of like, okay, I got to come prepared with all my questions, and I do my research, but now it's slowly turned into me just like totally soaking in as like hour and a half long lessons from really smart people. Like my notepad is just like chock full of like, oh, that's a great book. Oh, I'm gonna write down that book. Oh, Family Constitution, 7 Maturities. I like that. I need to implement it. I love it. So, okay. So I grew up very similarly, except for my dad was in the Air Force. So I bounced around a lot. So it was every 2 or 3 years moving schools. It was going into middle school or halfway through my 9th grade year, switching schools, which was a big transition and tricky. And a couple of our guests, it's interesting, have had similar experiences, but you ended up, I love the grit that it shows. When I talked to Guy Kawasaki, I've talked to all these different entrepreneurs and stuff, trying to figure things out. When I interviewed Guy Kawasaki on the podcast, and it's not like he's the first person that made it up, but I said, what do you see? Like, you've invested in all these businesses, you've seen your investment in time in Apple obviously take off, Canva take off. But we were talking about the 18 or 20 other investments he's made that were absolute failures. But he's like, in my world, 2 for 20, I'm killing it. Like I'm doing great. But I asked him like what some of those defining characteristics were that he saw amongst those entrepreneurs or those young people or whatever, or leaders, and Steve Jobs and stuff, when he worked with them, that separated them. And the word he used is grit. We hear a lot in the entrepreneur world. You hear that word, you hear hustle, you hear whatever. But the fact that when you're going into college, it's like, Dad didn't really give me the exact roadmap. My mom didn't either. That's okay. They were doing their own thing. They had 8 kids. I'm sure they were busy with the other 7 younger kids. I'm going to go wander into the school and I'm going to say, hey, do I live here then? And then I take class, whatever. We might be coming down a little bit, but that in my mind is that grit. It's that extra gear that's like, either nobody told me what to do, so I'm just going to go get a job at McDonald's and I'm going to figure this out, or I'm just going to drive in and I'm going to figure it out. I've got that extra. So as I look at your resume and everything that you've done, you can see, and I don't know all the details, but I get a sense that there's a lot of these moments built in, these, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go this extra step, or I'm going to start that conversation, or I'm going to open that door, even though I probably shouldn't be in the room, but I'm going to just step in anyway and see what happens. Is that a trend that you've seen in your career? Is that an attribute that you've developed?
You mentioned that people sort of like that there's a commonality sometimes among certain successful folks that have sort of bounced around a lot in their childhood or other things. And there's an element to having to figure it out over and over that is actually empowering, that teaches you how to do that. There's an element of you can figure it out, right? There's actually I think it builds confidence in the long term. In the short term, empowering. Sure, it sucks. Like you get different sentiments. There's also an element of like, everybody's got a story to tell and worthwhile and something to contribute, and you learn that when you've lived in 6 different places, right? It's really hard to judge people from a distance when you've lived in all over the place and seen all kinds of different backgrounds and all kinds of different people, and you've learned to love people from all over with different assets and skills and talents and interests and whatnot. I to this day I hire for only 2 traits generally: get it done and figure it out. I'm super outcomes oriented. I'm definitely not very process oriented. So I'll usually have a co-founder who is very process oriented, because it's a complementary skill set to my own. And I know that's a deficiency long-term, right? I'm not going to set up a repeatable process generally. that is not my strength.
What did you say? So your partners are process, and what did you say you were?
Outcome oriented.
Okay.
So that like, you'll talk to coders who are doing paired programming, and they'll have daily scrums and weekly, like, catch-ups. Like, I don't want to be in a meeting where everyone tells me about the 4 phone calls they made this week and the 3 conversations that are ongoing. I don't care. What I want to know is, did it get done or didn't it? And do you need help? Those are the only things like that, because everything else is process and like doesn't matter now, right? It's all like not even marginally interesting, right? What I want to know is like, what do I need to do?
I'm the same as you. The team. So the MWI here you see on this that's our digital marketing agency, and we've built it out, and we have an office in Hong Kong and stuff. The Hong Kong team, the US team knows this, but our Hong Kong team especially when I come into town, which unfortunately, gosh dang COVID, I haven't been able to be there, and it's been a mess. But when I go in, the thing they say when the CEO and the owner walks in, they know that my line is make it happen. It's like, hey, so and I'm like, yeah. So I mean, I'm going to give you my advice on this, and this, and now let's make it happen. And I didn't notice that I said that all the time. Our US team that we were building never even called it out, maybe because culturally that's more normal. But all of a sudden they all started like kind of tongue in cheek saying like, oh, make it happen. And then I realized, oh yeah, I say that like 50 times a day. And especially as I was building a team and building an office there, like it was like, we don't have time to, exactly like you said, talk about the calls and the problems and the whatever. What are the solutions? Like the biggest pet peeve that employees know of mine is to have a sentence about a problem, start stating a problem, and within the same breath, not at least mentioning a potential solution. Right. If it ends on like, yeah, well, this client and I'm like, it's just like, where are we going from here? Where are we going? Yeah. Like, what's the next step? And I always say, and this goes for anything in life, that's not to say you have to always know the answer and you have to always know the solution. The solution itself can be, I don't know the solution. Can you help me? That's a great solution. That's like, right, let's work on it. Let's work on it together. Let me get outside help. Let me read a book. Let me listen to a podcast, whatever I got to do. Yeah. But I hear you on that. You're speaking my language. And I have partners as well that are much more, like my co-CEO at the agency, I call Eagle Eye Kurt, because he pays attention to detail on things that I just don't even think about.
Every company I've started, I've had an attorney as a co-founder, right? Detail-oriented, super great skill set to have. I love heavily regulated space.
Curtis was going to be a lawyer, but then I swiped him and he came on with us. So he was getting ready to do the LSAT when we brought him over.
They but they're trained pessimists, right? Their job is to find liabilities and risks and protect against them. Mm-hmm. And so you can tell an elite lawyer from a good lawyer when they don't tell you no, but they tell you how. When they don't tell you it's hard, but they tell you how. They let you decide if it's hard and if you want to take on hard. Because the answer is very rarely that it can't be done. The answer is getting that done is going to take a lot, right? When Elon Musk says we want to put people on Mars, right? It's easy to be like, well, that's going to be hard and dismiss it. It's easy to say like, to tell them at the genesis of the idea, never going to happen. NASA will never give you an approval. The right response though is that's going to be brutally hard and really expensive, but here's how, right? And that's the elite attorney, right? That's the help you want. So when I hire, I don't need the world's greatest accountant. I need an average accountant. I need one who can do the job, right? 99 times out of 100, that's exactly what I need. So I need a center mass, right in the middle. That's all I'm looking for from a competency standpoint. So you come in and you've been an accountant for 10 years, you can do the job. The question is, can you get it done and figure it out? And that's what I hire for. Like that makes you the person that's going to fit in our team versus not. And I think in startups, that's incredibly important. And it's not as important in big companies sometimes. There's nothing wrong personality wise. There's not like, going to Bank of America is a fine career choice, but as you sit in your desk, there is someone over your shoulder who was in that desk 18 months ago. So you can turn around and say, what do I do now? And they'll have an answer. At a startup, there is no one there.
Yeah.
If you have to come to me and say, what do I do now? I have to stop what I'm doing, pull my eyes off the horizon as the CEO and figure out what you need to do. And I consider that your job, right? Like what do you need to do? Figure that out and then go get it done. And so, in an early stage startup, I think that's really, really important. I also, the traits that I have, like I'm not good at so much stuff. We couldn't, it would take longer than the podcast.
That'll be the next episode we do with you. It'll just be talking about what you're not good at. We'll both talk about all the things we're not good at for an hour.
But what makes me good at a couple things is I have two really dominant personality traits. I am irrationally confident. Like I just think it's going to work. Like I think I can do whatever. And so I'll read I remember finishing the Hunger Games and being like, I could have written that. And my, English professor wife is like, no, you couldn't. I'm like, I mean, the writing wasn't amazing. Story was good, but writing wasn't,
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, no. Right. But I'm the guy who like, maybe I'll say borderline arrogant because I want to be generous, but like, I think I can do anything. But I'm blindly optimistic too. And when you pair the two, so not only do I think I can do it, I think it'll work out in the best possible way. And I genuinely believe that. That's one of those things that I think has helped me when I'm raising funding, because you want to back somebody who can figure it out, who thinks they can do it, and who genuinely believes that in their heart, right? Like this guy will figure it out. stuff's going to come his way, but he'll push through. And so I sometimes think of it less as grit and more of like irrational, like confidence and optimism. Like it's going to work out. It's going to be fine. And it lets me look at risks through a different lens than, other folks. If you're halfway in your career and you're already a, network administrator or whatever, and you're thinking of starting a business, and it feels risky to leave your job. But in reality, if you go try to start something that doesn't work, you're still as qualified as you were before for the job you had before. You have a saleable skill set. The downside risk is near zero, and it has asymmetric upside. Like the potential is great. You discover what your natural calling is, and you do this thing that you love. And the downside risk is you tried something, but you're no worse off than you were before.
Go apply
and that,
at the same job or at another place. Yeah.
Yeah. Or similar. Right. And that's the thing where I think people, when you're not as confident in your own skill set, in your own value, like market value, then it feels riskier than it is in very real terms. And so it's enabled me to do things that other people might think were stupid, like try to start an airline.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I want to talk about. I hear you on all. I mean, I you're speaking my language. I get it, and there it is. You said that it borderline arrogant, but there is and that's an easy assumption to make with somebody that's very confident. But it is different. It is. And the other thing is that blind optimism, like you said, like that is it's an abundance mentality versus a scarcity mentality. It's somebody coming to you with, again, problems, and I genuinely feel like I'm the same way. I don't. And fortunately, my partner, Josh, is the same way too, as we were building our business. But it was like, it's just an opportunity to get better. It's just and one of the things I've said a lot, especially early on, especially when it was like other personality types were coming and saying like, oh my gosh, if this doesn't and if they don't pay, and I'm like, I have an ability, and the way that I always say it and the way that I visualize it is I literally take a deep breath and a step back. Like in my mind's eye, it's literally a step back, and it's just assessing the situation and saying, oh yeah, I see the worst case scenario, and it's actually not that bad. Worst case scenario, we could, and obviously like that's one of the things that, again, I haven't talked about Guy Kawasaki's interview for a while, but one of the things he said is that it is a big deal to fail. Like sometimes in entrepreneurship, it's like, no, it's whatever. He's like, no, this is people's money. This is people's livelihood. This is their retirement funds that you're messing 100%. With. Like it is important, but at the same time, you have to be able to have the confidence and optimism to see the glass half full and have that abundance mentality to where these bumps in the road can be building blocks. And it takes a special person to see that, I guess.
I served in Iraq in the end of, what was that? Probably end of 2009, beginning of 2010. And I was an intelligence officer for the government, not in
I have no idea how we're going to get into all this stuff in the next little bit because I have way too many questions. So go.
Well, I was not in the military, but I worked for an intelligence agency. And so I went to Iraq for one tour.
Law enforcement liaison. Is that what that was?
That's what it officially says.
Okay. Let's talk about all this stuff you're not supposed to talk about.
I was an intelligence officer. So I did other things. But when I left, right, they, you finish your tour, like everybody that you work with, they kind of gave you like a flag and some, like a carpet. We're in Baghdad, and then they all signed stuff, and they wrote down, like you said, you kind of had a catchphrase you didn't know. They sort of all, tongue in cheek wrote down, the war will be there in the morning. Because that sort of step back you talk about, apparently every night. So the great thing about a deployment is you're single-minded, single-focused. So you're in a war zone, you get up, you shower, you eat, you go to work. And then when your body stops, you go back to bed and you repeat every day. And it sounds monotonous, but it's not. It's a war zone. Stuff's changing all the time. There's lots to do. Like there's more work than can possibly be done in a day. Your hair is always on fire and there's always a crisis being dealt with. And which means from just like a work satisfaction standpoint, right, there's a lot to do and that's rewarding. But I would go to bed, right? At night when I'm done, it's time to go home and go to bed. And we might be in the middle of something intense. And apparently I would always say the war will be there in the morning. And there's an element of like understanding that while you feel like your hair's on fire, you're going to survive the night and you get to address it again in the morning. And for the work that we did, that was very true. I mean, I wasn't in a firefight, right? Like I wasn't a soldier where like we might not be there for you in the morning. That's a different situation.
Yeah.
But in our lives, very rarely are those the actual situations. For most things, the fight that you're fighting, whether it's your business, whether it's your relationship, whatever it is, will be there in the morning. And so sometimes the best move is to, like you said, pause, step back, reassess, go home, go to sleep, wake up in the morning and address it with a fresh mind. And I think that's actually really, really powerful. And the best, so founders and that I know, other folks that I look up to in different spheres, they all sleep well, right? They all go to bed at a reasonable time. They get up at a reasonable time and they come at problems fresh. And they're not afraid to step back. They don't panic themselves into having to solve it right now when you're operating at your worst, right? When you're drained and spent and you get hit with something new, and there's like, they know how to step back and address it with a fresh view.
And that's invaluable. The boss that you've had that you couldn't stand and that created a negative environment to work in, it's because most likely they were trying to solve problems with that high stress, high anxiety. We've got to get this done now. There's no other option. Did it, like that. Nobody performs as, whether it's your kids and you're a parent parenting that way, or you're an employer and your employee, whatever like that. It's just not an environment that breeds optimism and success and positivity, which are all things that you need in order to make anything happen. Right. Yeah. So I hear you, man. That's so how did you start working for, because you were part of the campaign for Bush and Cheney in 2004.
Yeah.
So we're going to go back
to reelect for like a couple of years. Yeah.
And how did you get into politics? How did that transition happen?
I was working a job and I was writing a political column on the side. And Bush in his first campaign, they had the new campaign finance reform, had innovated this concept called bundlers, where people would, since you can only donate so much money, they'd call 100 of their friends and bundle all those sort of checks together to support the campaign. And so in the reelection campaign, so there were like 178, I don't remember now, but there weren't like 200 of them around the country. And there were 5 in Missouri, Adele Hall of Hallmark and, Bucky Bush, the president's uncle, first Bush's brother, and the CEO of Merrill Lynch. And there were all these famous folks. And then there was this like radio station magnate named John Mahaffey in southeastern Missouri. So he was the least intimidating of them all. And I wanted to write an article. So I called them to talk about the fundraising experience, et cetera. And John Mahaffey was, an 88-year-old guy or something at the time. And he couldn't have any idea what impact the conversation would have on my life. But he was like, so I'm talking to him about it. And he's like, well, what are you, downside of 30? I'm probably like 23 at the time. I'm like, yeah, I'm a long ways downside of 30, sir. He's like, well, do you know Bucky Bush? I'm like, I don't know any members of the Bush family. No. He's like, well, I got to call him on another matter anyway. I'm going to have him give you a call on Friday. And so I'm sitting at my desk and the president's uncle calls me. And halfway through that call, he's like, what are you, downside of 30? And said that
that's something they're looking for, apparently.
I was like, I certainly am. And he's like, well, would you commit to raise money raise $100,000 for the president? He asked me to be a bundler. And I was just writing like a little newsletter article, and I, again, irrationally confident and blindly optimistic. I'm like, I could do that. Yeah, for sure. So I said, no, I won't raise 100,000 for the president. I'll raise 200,000 for the president. And he's like, okay, welcome to the team. And so now I'm like an unpaid, on the side fundraiser, and everybody else is doing it. Like I said, it's the CEO of Merrill Lynch. They go to their Rolodex, they call 1,000 people and 100 come check. I don't know anybody I was a Pell Grant student. I don't know a single human with money.
Yeah.
And so I called everybody I knew and nobody can donate. And I tried to hustle and find my way to people with money that could donate, and they'd all already donated because it's a re-election campaign, right? 4 years ago, somebody found them too. And so I was phenomenally bad at it. I spent a year fundraising and I spent more of my own money than I raised. I actually retired. I was 23, 24. I cashed out my 401k, left my job and tried to full-time do this. And
the reason why is because you saw the upside, the long-term upside of the connections and the networking opportunities and the potential relationships.
I felt like I was doing something important.
Okay.
And there's, again, if I had a bigger view, maybe I would have been thinking like that. In reality, I thought I was doing something important.
It was more selfish than I just said. I went straight selfish. No, not really. I felt the door opening to me, just a crack. Yeah.
That was never going to be open to me. I never could have imagined would have been. And I thought, I don't know what's on the other side of it, but I'm going to push my way through.
For sure. Yeah.
So I probably spent, my 401k at that point had, nothing. I probably spent $5,000. I lived on I rented and I put a twin bed in a buddy's unfinished basement and in DC and rented it for nothing, and raised what I could. And I probably didn't raise the same as much as I spent. So at 1 year, calendar year of doing that on my birthday, I called the campaign. I'm like, hey, like, it's not helping you. It's not helping me. Like, it's not working. I'm clearly not good at this. And they said, well, why don't you take a trip with us? And I ended up doing mostly press advance for the vice president then through the rest of the campaign into 2005. So I was, White House, mostly campaign staff technically.
Press advance is you literally, so the vice president's going to do all of these different events and doing all of this different press, and you're going ahead of him and getting it all set up, making sure that when he shows up, it's seamless, it's easy, it's everything. Is crossed.
I would meet Air Force 2 on the ground, right? Jump in the motorcade, brief him on what's going to happen. He gets out, looks good. He gets back in the car, goes to the plane. Air Force 2 takes off, and then I take a commercial flight to the next destination. So he would fly 2 days a week, and I would fly, 27 days a month.
Key word in this, as the story unfolds, is commercial flight. You would take a commercial flight.
Booked last minute and one way as a military aged male, which meant I got a bonus screening on every flight.
Oh yeah, sure.
Secret Service, who I'm often flying with, they'd always chuckle because they badge through, and there's 25 guns on this plane because it's all Secret Service agents. And
at that time in the world,
bonus screening.
Just post 9/11, you're like, I just booked this flight earlier today.
One way. Yeah. I'm 23. I met all the profile things that they wanted. So for the random second screening.
Well, the door opened up.
I would say that. Sorry, if it's the same job, if I did the same job for, Imagine Dragons, they'd call me a roadie, right? Like it sounds nicer when it's the White House, but in practice, like, you set up staging and lighting, and you make sure there's nothing in the background that's going to make them look goofy. And, it's not a high level job. It's a great, like, early career job where you're introduced to lots of folks and get to feel like you're in and around. To quote Hamilton, right? Like, you want to be in the room where it happened.
In the room where it happened.
I'm a fly on the wall in the room where it happened, and I didn't get a voice, but it was great. Right.
Yeah.
And for me, it was fantastic.
What was the experience like working with Dick Cheney? I mean, what was what was he like as a boss?
I would say grandfatherly, but interpersonally, he's great. I once he gets in the car, the motorcade leaves, and if you're not in it, like, you missed it, and you're gonna figure out how to get to your next spot. We're all mic'd up and on comms the way that Secret Service is. In fact, we're on the same channel, so we hear everything. And somebody wasn't in the car, and so we're in the underground basement of a Westin in Seattle. And I go tearing out of the car to go get her to make sure she doesn't miss it, because the radio is, like, for whatever reason, we're having an issue. And I came running around a corner in a tunnel, and I ran smack into the Vice President of the United States. And I did not know what to do. And I just full on, like, gave him a hug and then kept going. like bro tapped a hug and just rolled on to go get her in the motorcade, which we were successful at. So no, I mean, super grandfatherly in that sense. But I think he got a reputation of, he'd been around so much that it's kind of like your grandfather, where, like, you come to him with an idea and he's like, he kind of knows better. He's been around. And so what would happen is people spent 9 months prepping a briefing for him, right? And he'd be like, well, we tried it in 83 and it didn't work for this. We tried it in 89, it didn't work for this. In 94, we tried it and it didn't work for this. Now we just know better, so we're not going to do that. And you're like 7 minutes into your 20-minute presentation that you spent 9 months prepping on.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, always sounds like a good idea, but doesn't work for all these reasons. And you leave there and you're like, this guy's Darth Vader. I hate this guy. When in reality, like, he's just kind of like, he had been around so long in such significant roles that a lot of times he just already knew. And so, but I think a lot of his reputation came from that. But in reality, like, I never had a negative interaction with him. So I we had policy differences, but I didn't talk about any policy stuff at the time.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't my role. And I, thought they'd be better than the alternative. So I was happy to work for them. I consider it a privilege to this day. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. And I love, again, the leave the job, the stable job that you had, cash out and go on this path because you saw a door cracked a little bit and you just said, what's on the other side? I don't know. But again, there's that optimism, that the optimism and the crazy confidence that come where it's like, I'm just going to, if I think I could do this, I can do this better than anybody else can. Why don't I just do it? And we'll see what's on the other side of the door. And sure enough, even when you did it, the great story here is you failed at it. You weren't great at it. It's not like you didn't all of a sudden go meet the guy that had $1 million. but you ended up taking a next step, which I'm sure just being on the staff or the vice president, just that alone and the experience that you learned has opened up. I can't imagine how many other doors as you've continued to build line upon line on with everything you've done.
I'll say that while I am irrationally confident, I think I can do it. It never means that I think someone else couldn't do it better. Or certainly very, very rarely. I think that's actually the difference between being just sort of irrationally confident and arrogant. It's like, I don't think I'm better at it than anyone else. I just think like that I could do it, right, most of the time. And I will say, I then raised money for Mitt Romney 4 years later, and I was one of his top 40 fundraisers. I was the youngest of his top 40 fundraisers as he kicked off his campaign in 2007. And so I got better at it. I'm also not used to sucking at something quite that bad. Yeah. I mean, I was so bad at fundraising that I spent the next 4 years like thinking about how to get better at it. And then I was better at it. And
you built things in between. I mean, there were things that happened in your career between there that gave you the network and the connections to have that one person to be able to reach out to. It's like when we interviewed Lindsay Hadley, and she was saying like she was doing the Global Citizen event that was like she had to have the money by the day and she didn't have it. And so she, go listen to the episode, but she got to the point where she said, I'm just going to go through Facebook and this is my Hail Mary. I'm going to go through Facebook, see if I know anybody who knows anybody that can help out. And sure enough, she's like, oh yeah, I went to high school with Larry King's stepdaughter. Like I'm going to, yeah. And so she gets a hold of her and then she's like, yeah, maybe I can put you in touch with Larry. And then she gets in and then, a week later, she's sitting in Larry King's house with a table full of people of billionaires that are like, yeah, we'll give you the money you need to do the thing, and that's just awesome. Turned into everything. Knowing you have a hard stop here, tell me a little bit about the transition to Surf Air, because that's a huge entrepreneurial endeavor and it's a good stepping stone on everything that we've talked about of this confidence and there's the doors opening. And then the reason I brought up earlier is because I watched some interviews that you did and you were flying commercial and it just was so inconvenient and inefficient. And you had the optimism and like we said before, the confidence to say, why don't we just do this better? Let's disrupt the airline industry. So you started a new airline company. What was that like? And again, I know a ton of time, but
we invented subscription flying, right? We don't sell tickets, $2,000 a month, all you can fly. Inside there's two kinds of people airlines usually think about. Most people, 80% of people fly once a year. They go to, grandma's house for Thanksgiving or whatever it was. The other 20% are frequent flyers. Inside that group of frequent flyers, there's a group we identify as frequent commuters. They don't just fly all the time. They fly all the time between the same 2 or 3 spots, right? They're the venture capitalists in San Francisco and they've got portfolio companies in LA and they're down there every week, at least once a week, For those folks, we can materially change their life by giving them a subscription, like let them come and go as they need. They don't have to book flights all the time. They don't have to it's just a better experience. And we could standardize on an aircraft that TSA doesn't regulate. So you can just go to the airport, get on the plane and go. But what happened is I was working for an intelligence agency. I'd come back from Iraq. We had a baby 2 weeks later and thought, maybe it's time to be a dad, do something different for a living. So I crossed out of what I was doing and I became an economist at the Pentagon covering Europe and NATO for the J2 and chairman of the Joint Chiefs as I was applying to business schools and trying to cross out. And I ended up doing some consulting at the NSA and I got into Stanford. And so we're going to move the family out to San Francisco. And my little brother graduates Embry-Riddle, which means he's a pilot. And he calls me and he's like, there's no jobs for pilots. What do I do? And I'm the guy who never had a path, right? Didn't know what I wanted to be. I'm 42, still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. He knew he wanted to be a pilot and he had a path and he committed to it and he's, got all the debt, right? And he's burning jet fuel in college. And he said, what do I do? And I said, I don't know. What's it going to take to keep you in the air? You know your path. Let's keep you on it. What's it going to take? And he's young and flippant. And he says, I don't know, buy a plane, start an airline, which is just asinine generally, but especially for 2 kids who grew up, on and off of government support, right? It wasn't like a reasonable, why don't we tap our trust fund and buy a plane?
Yeah.
And so, but my sort of we can do anything and I'll figure it out. I said, okay, well, I'll look into it and let you know. And I hung up the phone. And so that's what happened. And we did, and we looked into it and we put up a placeholder website and said, we're thinking of starting a subscription airline when we realized we wanted to do a different model. And mostly we bought it was called Plane Red at the time. We bought the domain so that we could stop arguing over what to call our little hobby business that we were thinking about on the side. And he did a good job with an airline running an airport, not flying, but just to stay in the industry. And 6 weeks after we put up the website, it was just a single image sort of email capture. We checked the site to see if anyone had seen it, right? We sent out a half dozen emails to friends and family. I have a big family, right? And a Facebook post. 10,000 people had signed up, and including press outreach from Chicago Tribune and Washington Post and like all kinds of folks. And so we thought, oh no, I think we just validated this. What do we do now? And so November 11th, 2011, we brought in friends, family, anybody we knew we thought was sort of smart and willing to give us the time. It's a holiday in DC, everything's shut down. We borrowed a conference room at the Nuclear Energy Institute from a friend. We spent $100 on Costco snacks, and we had dentists and accountants and attorneys and whoever else we knew that like would come spend 2 days with us, and we workshopped it. You know, we had a team working on HR and hiring, and a team on regulatory, and a team on marketing, and then at the end of the 2 days, we brought everybody back together and said, so what do you think? I'm thinking of leaving my stable job and doing something that I know sounds nuts, but I need to know how nuts it is. And they said, not only is it a good idea, 4 guys in the room said, we'll leave our jobs and do it with you. And so I had a founding team, right? My brother, myself, 4 other guys, and we ended up in a startup incubator in LA in January. And Stanford starts in, July or August. And so we figured, what's 5 extra months of debt when you're going to take out $250,000 for business school or whatever,
Yeah.
So my wife and oldest then, only child then, stayed in Maryland. We were living outside of Fort Meade where the NSA is, and drove and I'm out in California. She's like, I'm moving to California once. Tell me if we're going to LA or SF. Right. And so, we rented an apartment with the 10 grand or something we got from the incubator and put air mattresses on the ground. I'm literally sharing a bunk with my brother. Like it was like when we were kids, except we're both married with kids now, and we're sharing like air mattresses on the floor. And it was like a deployment. We woke up every day, went to work, and when your body stopped, you went home. 90 days later, we raised $4 million. And so I turned down Stanford, and I asked if I could defer, and they said no. They said, it's okay though, you'll come back and teach someday. Made me feel good on the way out. It's just classiest thing I could have imagined them doing.
Yeah,
I'm
awesome.
super nervous about it, and so we off to the races. We raised 3 rounds in 6 months. We went from 27 to 82 employees in 3 weeks. It was a hyper growth, and it still flies today. So that's probably the fastest I've ever told that story.
Yeah, that is fast. And I know you got a hard stop. So I just want to say that I appreciate the time. First of all, I think, again, the story of the podcast is to talk to incredible people, to hear their stories, to hear how they approach life, and to weave, whether it's directly and we say it directly or not. And in this case, I think there's so many strategies for hope in the way that you've taken, your walking into the college to figure that out, all the way to what you've done today. Just with the last minute that we have, real quick, tell me what you're working on right now, and if anybody's interested or wants to get involved, where they can find you and where they can look you up.
Degreeinsurance.co. You email me, wade@degreeinsurance.co. But what we've done is we looked at higher education and realized it's the largest uninsured investment most people will ever make. You get insurance on your house, on your car, on your cell phone, and you're going to spend $100,000 to go to school, and there's no hedge, there's no protection, right? You're taking out a risk. College works really well on average, but if it doesn't work for you, you just set a family back for a generation. So what we've done is build an insurance product. We build a guarantee that we sell to colleges, where colleges can tell their students now, if you go here, we guarantee you'll make, and you graduate in business, $48,000 a year, and 51 in physics, and 43 in English, or whatever it is. And so students can guarantee their future, and that it was worth it to go to college. We take the risk out of that. So we just in January started opening up to sell that. We're an insurance company, so we've got to get licensure in all the different states, but we're in a couple states now. So if you want to, if you care about the American dream and helping people level up and permanently move into the middle class and stay there, then come hit our website.
Degreeinsurance.co, right?
.co.
.co. Yeah, I would love to. I'd love to be involved. Let's stay in touch on that. Again, having been in it a little bit in the trenches on the academic side, even though I wasn't a professor. Well, I was a professor, but as an entrepreneur in residence, I love what you're doing. It'd be fun to see what you're working on. We'll have to connect.
I'd love to chat as well. I'd love to chat again, actually, if you want to talk more sort of business back. I mean, we did parenting, we did all kinds of stuff, but if you want to do this again sometime, let me know.
Okay, let's do it for sure. Thank you so much for the time. I'll reach out to you, and then send me a bio if you could when you get a second. Just send me an email.
Already in your inbox.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Corey.
Bye. Hello, it's Corey here, and I just want to thank you so much for listening into the Hope Strategy Podcast. I hope you're enjoying it as much as we are enjoying having these amazing conversations with these incredible individuals talking about hope. We'd love it if you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, and leaving us a review on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, and share it with anybody you feel that can benefit from these messages of hope. Thank you so much for listening to the Hope Strategy Podcast.